Liam looked across the minimalist white marble of their kitchen island, a space designed for effortless entertaining, not for the confession of messy human troubles. His wife, Serafina, was adjusting the strap of a ridiculously expensive watch, her wrist angled just so, catching the morning light that streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below them, a kingdom she felt was hers by birthright. "I'm in trouble, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of genuine distress. He had rehearsed the words, the tone. He needed to see, he needed to know. Serafina didn't look up. She was focused on the clasp, a tiny, intricate mechanism of platinum and diamonds. She clicked it shut with a satisfied snap. "Trouble?" she repeated, the word tasting foreign and unpleasant in her mouth. She finally lifted her eyes, but they didn't meet his. They scanned his simple gray t-shirt and worn jeans with a familiar, faint air of disapproval. "What kind of trouble?" "The firm," he said, keeping the explanation simple, a test of faith. "We lost the Kensington account, and there are complications, potential liabilities. It's serious." For a brief, flickering moment, he allowed himself to hope. He watched for a sign of concern, a furrowing of her brow, a step towards him, a hand reaching out. He hoped for the partner he had once believed she could be. Instead, Serafina picked up her clutch, a sleek black thing that probably cost more than his first car. She checked her reflection in the polished chrome of the espresso machine. "Liam, honestly," she sighed, a sound of profound and weary disappointment. "I have mimosas with the girls at 11. It's my Saturday. I can't be expected to deal with your business anxieties right now." She turned, her gaze finally locking with his, and what he saw there was a chilling void. There was no sympathy. There was no partnership. There was only irritation, as if he were a leaky faucet she simply didn't have time to call a plumber for. She delivered the final, devastating verdict with the casual indifference of a queen dismissing a courtier. "That's your problem," she said. Then, with a swish of her silk dress, she walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking a sharp, merciless rhythm on the polished concrete floor. A moment later, the heavy front door closed with a solid, definitive thud. Liam stood alone in the cavernous, silent apartment. The silence was louder than any argument. It was an answer. It was the answer he had been dreading and expecting for years. He walked over to the window and watched her get into the waiting town car below, a tiny, elegant figure disappearing into the city's maw. She went to brunch. He thought she was his partner. He thought their marriage was a structure they had built together. He didn't know he was just a decorative element in a life she had designed for herself. Within 3 months, the foundation of her entire world would be shattered, and the man she had just dismissed as a problem would become the only person who could save her. And he would not. We hope you're enjoying this story so far. It's a tale about hidden strengths and the quiet dignity that endures even when faced with contempt. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us that true worth is never just on the surface. Now let's get back to the moment it all began to unravel. The roots of Serafina's dismissal ran deep, back to the very beginning of their relationship. They had met at a gallery opening. He was there because his small, burgeoning firm had designed the lighting scheme, a subtle and complex system that made the art breathe. He was standing in a corner, observing, when she had appeared like a bolt of lightning. She was the daughter of Marcus Thorne, a real estate mogul whose face was plastered on the city's business journals, a man who built glass towers that scraped the sky and reflected his own monumental ego. Serafina moved through the world with the same inherited confidence. She was dazzling, articulate, and possessed a beauty so striking it seemed almost aggressive. She had approached him, intrigued by the quiet man who seemed utterly unimpressed by the glitterati surrounding them. "You're the architect, aren't you?" she'd asked, her voice a low, melodious hum. "I designed the lighting," he had corrected gently. Details, she had waved a dismissive, jeweled hand. You create things. I find that quaint. Even then, he had recognized the faint note of condescension, but he had mistaken it for a form of playful curiosity. He was charmed by her energy, her sharp wit, her seemingly genuine interest in his work. He saw, or wanted to see, a depth beneath the polished, privileged veneer. He believed there was a person in there who valued substance, who might one day see the world not just as a backdrop for her own fabulous life, but as a place of intricate, interconnected beauty. He had been wrong. Their courtship was a whirlwind conducted on her terms. They dined at restaurants he couldn't have afforded, vacationed in places he'd only seen in magazines. He was introduced to her family, the formidable Marcus and the elegantly brittle Eleanor, in their palatial home, a place that felt more like a museum of wealth than a family residence. He always felt like an exhibit himself, the talented but humble architect that Serafina had discovered. He was her project. She loved the idea of him, the handsome, earthy artist she could elevate, polish, and present to her circle as a testament to her own discerning taste. When he proposed, he did it on a quiet beach, with a ring he had spent months saving for. She had accepted, but her first act as his fiancé was to take him to her family's jeweler to have the simple, elegant diamond properly set in a nest of platinum and smaller, flashier stones. It was a metaphor for their entire relationship. He provided the substance, she provided the setting she deemed appropriate, a setting that always managed to obscure the original stone. He had married her believing that love could bridge the gap between their worlds. He thought that in the quiet, private moments, the real partnership would form. But the private moments were few and far between. Their life was a performance, and he was perpetually miscast, his quiet nature seen as a weakness, his principled approach to his work seen as a lack of ambition. He built his firm slowly, carefully, taking on projects that had meaning, that challenged him, that contributed something of value. He built his fortune even more quietly, through a parallel venture she knew nothing about, a strategic alliance that was growing into a global force. He kept this secret not as a weapon, but as a sanctuary. It was the one part of his life that was wholly his, untouched by her judgment, unsoiled by her family's transactional values. It was his proof to himself that his worth was not defined by their narrow, materialistic worldview. And now, that secret was about to become his shield, his sword, and his salvation. The brunch was just the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. The weekly Sunday dinner at the Thorne estate was less a family gathering and more a corporate board meeting, where the primary agenda was the continued celebration of Marcus Thorne. The dining room was a study in oppressive opulence, a cavernous space with a ceiling so high it seemed to have its own weather system, dominated by a mahogany table that could comfortably seat 20. Tonight there were only 4. Marcus enthroned at the head, his wife Eleanor, a portrait of preserved elegance at the other end, and Serafina and Liam, seated opposite each other, the vast, polished expanse of wood between them, a tangible representation of the emotional distance in their marriage. The Meridian group finally caved, Marcus announced, slicing into a piece of steak with surgical precision. His voice boomed, filling the room, accustomed to being the only one worth listening to. They knew we had them cornered. Their financing was weak, their designs were derivative, amateurs. He took a triumphant bite, chewing with the satisfaction of a predator. Eleanor smiled faintly, a practiced, Botox-smooth expression. "That's wonderful, dear. You always know how to get what you want." Serafina preened, basking in the reflected glory of her father's success. "Daddy's a shark," she said, directing the comment at Liam, as if explaining a complex law of nature. "He doesn't do business, he wins." Liam took a slow sip of water. He had learned that silence was his best defense at these dinners. To engage was to invite scrutiny. To argue was to commit heresy. He simply existed, a quiet, well-dressed ghost at their feast of self-congratulation. But tonight, Marcus was in a particularly expansive mood, and his gaze fell upon Liam like a spotlight seeking out a flaw in the scenery. "And you, Liam? Still drawing your little pictures? What's the latest masterpiece? A two-car garage in the suburbs?" The question hung in the air, thick with condescension. It wasn't a genuine inquiry, it was a power play, a way of reminding everyone at the table of Liam's perceived status. He was the court jester, the amusing diversion. Serafina laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on Liam's nerves. "Oh, Daddy, be nice. Liam is very passionate about his projects." The way she said the word projects made it sound like macaroni art. She was not defending him, she was managing him, smoothing over his perceived inadequacies to maintain the evening's pleasantries. It was a deeper betrayal than her father's overt insult. Liam met Marcus's smug gaze. He felt the familiar surge of frustration, the hot anger that he had learned to compress into a cold, dense point of resolve deep inside him. He placed his fork down gently, his movements deliberate. "It's a community library, actually," he said, his voice even and calm. "In the Northwood district." Marcus snorted. "A library? My God, is there any money in that? Or is it one of those charity cases?" "Sometimes value isn't measured in profit margins, Marcus," Liam replied, the words simple, yet carrying a quiet challenge. A flicker of annoyance crossed Marcus's face. He was not used to being contradicted, however gently. "That's a very noble thought, son. A very poor thought. This world, the world we live in, runs on profit. It runs on growth, on acquisition. Anything else is a hobby." He gestured around the grand room with his fork. "This wasn't built with noble thoughts." Liam's hand under the table rested on a worn leather tube he had brought with him. It was a habit he developed, carrying the initial concept drawings for his real work. It was a totem, a physical reminder of the truth he held in reserve. Inside that simple tube were the nascent sketches of the Helios Project, a revolutionary urban redevelopment initiative so vast, so ambitious, that Marcus Thorne's entire real estate empire would be a mere footnote to it. They saw a man sketching libraries. They had no idea he was redesigning the very concept of a modern city. Serafina, sensing the shift in atmosphere, moved to de-escalate, but in her typical fashion, she did so by further diminishing him. "Liam has a different way of looking at things," she said to her father, a placating smile on her face. "He's an artist. We can't all be sharks, can we?" She then turned to Liam, her eyes flashing a warning. "Drop it. Don't ruin the evening." He looked at his wife. He saw the beautiful, intricate facade he had fallen for, and behind it, the hollow framework of her values. She wasn't his partner. She was her father's daughter, through and through. In that moment, he wasn't just observing their behavior, he was cataloging it. He was a meticulous architect, and this was a structural analysis of his own failed marriage. He noted every stress fracture, every weak joint, every compromised beam. The humiliation was no longer just a feeling, it was data, and he was an expert at using data to build something new. He picked up his fork and returned to his meal, offering no further response. His silence was misinterpreted by the Thorns as acquiescence, as defeat. They saw a man who knew his place. They couldn't hear the sound of foundations being laid for a new reality, one in which they would have no place at all. The quiet clink of his fork against the plate was, to him, the sound of a timer being set. The dinner continued, their voices a drone of self-importance, but Liam was no longer there. He was in his secret world, a world of grand designs and silent, meticulous preparation. And in that world, he was the shark. The call came 2 weeks later. It wasn't Marcus who called. His pride would never allow it. It was Serafina, her voice tight with a manufactured, theatrical panic. "Liam, we need to talk. It's an emergency." He found her in their apartment's home office, a room she used mostly for online shopping, pacing in front of the window that overlooked the financial district. She was still in her tennis whites, a stark contrast to the grim expression on her face. "It's Daddy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was a good performance. The Azure Point development, it's collapsing." Liam remained standing in the doorway, his expression neutral. He knew all about Azure Point. He had warned Marcus against it over a year ago. It was a monument to hubris, a luxury high-rise built on speculation, financed with dangerously high-interest loans, and marketed to an oligarch class that was now spooked by shifting global economics. Liam had seen the structural flaws in the business plan just as clearly as he would have seen them in a building's foundation. "He's over-leveraged," Serafina continued, twisting a diamond bracelet on her wrist. "The final round of financing fell through. The bank is going to call the loan. He'll lose everything, Liam. The company, the house, everything." Liam listened, his silence prompting her to get to the real point. Finally, she stopped pacing and faced him, her eyes hard and demanding. "You have to help." "Help how?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Your money," she said, the words blunt and stripped of all pretense. "Your portfolio, the savings you have for your firm. You need to liquidate it. We need to give it to Daddy to cover the shortfall." It was not a request, it was an order. The entitlement was breathtaking. His life's work, the capital he had carefully accumulated through years of diligent effort on his small projects, was to be sacrificed without a moment's thought to prop up her father's reckless gamble. "Sarah," he began, his voice still calm, "I looked at the Azure Point numbers a long time ago. Pouring more money into it now won't save it. It's a fundamentally flawed project. The market has turned. It would be throwing good money after bad." He was offering her his professional expertise, a final, desperate attempt to be seen as a partner with a voice worth hearing. Her reaction was instant and furious. "What would you know about developments of this scale?" she snapped, her voice dripping with the same condescension her father had shown at the dinner table. "You build libraries and renovate kitchens. This is the big league. My father knows what he's doing. He just had some bad luck. This is about family, Liam. It's our duty. Your money is our money. It's a safety net. This is the rainy day it was saved for." "Is it?" he asked softly. "Or is it a bailout for a mistake he refused to see?" "I can't believe you're being so selfish," she cried, her voice rising. "After everything my family has done for you, we brought you into this world. We gave you this life." She gestured around the multi-million-dollar apartment, as if it were a gift she had bestowed upon him, rather than a home whose mortgage was paid predominantly by the income from his hobby. The injustice of it was a physical blow. He had paid for this life, this stage for her performance, and she was using it as a weapon against him. The conversation was over. He had his answer. He nodded slowly. "I need to think about it," he said, the words a careful, strategic retreat. "There's nothing to think about," she shot back. "Just do it." Later that night, long after Serafina had fallen asleep in a huff of righteous indignation, Liam sat in the dark of his own, smaller office. He opened his laptop, the screen illuminating his face, which was now set like stone. He initiated a secure video call. A moment later, a face appeared on the screen. It was Javier Reyes, his partner. Javier's background was not a lavish apartment, but a bustling, open-plan design studio, even at this late hour. Blueprints and models were visible behind him. The energy of real, productive work hummed through the screen. "Liam," Javier said, his voice warm, but with a sharp, focused edge. "Everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Liam replied. "I've just seen the future." He paused. "Javier, how are we looking on the Helios project financials?" Javier grinned, a flash of white teeth. "Financials? Liam, we're not a company. We're a sovereign state. The Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund just confirmed their final tranche. The Zoning Commission approved the Phase 2 variance this morning. The press embargo lifts in 48 hours. We are, and I say this with professional humility, the most successful architectural venture on the planet right now." Why do you ask? Liam leaned back in his chair, the darkness of his own apartment a stark contrast to the bright, creative world on his screen. Because I'm about to make a withdrawal, he said, not of money, of myself. It's time to demolish the old structure. Javier's grin faded, replaced by a look of deep understanding. He knew about Liam's marriage, about the thorns. He had been the silent witness to Liam's long-suffering patience. It's time then? It's time, Liam confirmed. He looked over his shoulder, down the hall toward the master bedroom where his wife slept, dreaming, no doubt, of how she would spend his money. The storm is here. Let's see who has built their house on rock and who has built it on sand. The next morning, Liam initiated the final, painful test. He approached Serafina as she was preparing for her day, the memory of their fight from the night before still hanging in the air between them like a toxic fog. He had to give her one last chance to be the person he had once hoped she was. He had to know, for his own peace of mind, that he had turned over every stone before walking away. He adopted an air of defeat, of genuine fear. His shoulders were slumped, his face etched with worry. It was a performance, but it was fueled by the real pain of his disillusionment. "Sarah," he began, his voice strained, "about last night, there's something else, something I didn't tell you." She was applying mascara with a steady hand, her reflection in the vanity mirror her primary focus. "If this is another lecture about my father's business acumen, I'm not interested," she said coldly. "No, it's about me," he said. "My firm." He took a breath. "The trouble I mentioned a few weeks ago, the reason I came to you before your brunch, it's gotten worse, much worse." This got her attention. She lowered the mascara wand, her eyes narrowing in the mirror. "Worse? How?" "The client we lost, Kensington, they're not just pulling the contract, they're suing me," he lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "They're claiming a breach, citing structural miscalculations in the preliminary designs. It's baseless, a tactic to break the contract without penalty, but the legal fees will be astronomical. And if we lose, even if we don't, the reputational damage could be fatal for the firm." He let his voice crack just enough. "Sarah, they could wipe me out. Everything, the savings, the portfolio, it could all be gone." He stood there, vulnerable, having laid his fabricated ruin at her feet. This was the moment of truth. Would she see a partner in crisis and offer her support? Would she say, "We'll face this together"? Would she, for once, put us before her family's insatiable needs? Her face, reflected in the mirror, went through a series of micro-expressions. First, a flicker of alarm, then a chillingly rapid calculation. Finally, her features hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She spun around on the vanity stool to face him, her eyes blazing not with sympathy, but with accusation. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "How could you be so incompetent, so irresponsible?" Liam was stunned into silence. He had expected coldness, dismissal. He had not expected to be blamed. "Just when my family needs you, when I need you to be strong, you fall apart," she seethed. "You let this happen. Do you have any idea what this means? My father is on the brink of collapse, and you, my husband, have made yourself completely and utterly useless." The word hung in the air. Useless. "This isn't just about you, Liam," she went on, her voice rising with every word. "This is about me, my future, the life we are supposed to have. You've put all of that at risk because you couldn't handle one single project." He just stared at her, a profound and hollow sadness washing over him. The last ember of hope he had been nursing was extinguished, leaving behind nothing but cold, hard certainty. She did not see him. She did not see his pain, fabricated though it was. She only saw the interruption of her supply chain. He was a resource that had just been declared contaminated. Before he could even respond, her phone buzzed. It was her father. She answered it, turning her back on Liam as if he no longer existed. "Daddy? Yes, I know. He just told me. No, he's being impossible, selfish, and now he has his own disaster to deal with, a complete failure." She listened for a moment, then her face hardened further. "Yes, I agree. It's time to stop asking. You and Mother should come over. We'll handle this, all of us, together." She hung up and turned back to him, her face a mask of cold resolve. "My parents are on their way," she announced. "We are going to have a family meeting. You are going to listen, and you are going to understand what is required of you. Your little problems will have to wait. My family comes first." Liam felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him. It was the quiet that comes after a storm has passed, leveling everything. There was nothing left to break. The test was over. She had failed in a way more spectacular than he could have ever imagined. He gave a single, slow nod. "All right, Sarah, let's have a family meeting." He walked out of the bedroom, leaving her to her righteous fury. He went to his study and sat behind his desk, the desk where he had built a secret empire. He looked out the window at the city, at the glass towers glinting in the sun. They looked so solid, so permanent, but he knew the truth. Anything built on a weak foundation was destined to fall, and the ground was about to shake. An hour later, the intervention began. They gathered in the formal living room, a space so perfectly curated it felt like a magazine spread, all cream-colored couches and tastefully abstract art. Marcus and Eleanor sat opposite Liam, a united front of parental authority. Serafina stood by the fireplace, pacing like a caged panther, her arms crossed tightly. The air was thick with their collective, righteous indignation. They were the judges, the jury, and the executioners. Liam was the prisoner in the dock. Marcus, as always, took the lead. He leaned forward, his hands steepled, assuming the posture of a man about to close a deal he had already won. "Liam," he began, his voice a low rumble of feigned patience. "We've been patient. We have treated you like a son. We welcomed you into this family, and with that comes certain responsibilities." Eleanor nodded in perfect synchrony. "Family helps family, Liam. It's the most basic principle of a civilized life." "But you seem to be struggling with that principle," Marcus continued, his voice hardening. "You come to my daughter with your own financial mess, a mess of your own making, at the precise moment this family requires solidarity. It is deeply disappointing." Serafina stopped pacing. "It's more than disappointing, Daddy. It's a betrayal." Liam remained silent, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He let them speak. He wanted to hear it all, to have it all laid out in the open. He was a meticulous architect, and he needed the full survey of the damage before beginning the demolition. "So, this is how it's going to be," Marcus said, getting to the point. He gestured to a leather briefcase on the floor beside him. "My lawyers have drawn up the papers. It's a simple transfer. You will sign over your investment portfolio and the liquid assets of your company to the Thorn Corporation's primary holding company. It will be collateral, of course. A loan. Once the Azure Point crisis is averted and the project is profitable, you will be repaid." The lie was so bald-faced, so insulting in its transparency, that Liam almost smiled. They had no intention of ever repaying him. This was an annexation. "It's the only way to salvage the situation," Marcus concluded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "It's the only sensible path forward." Liam let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of their expectant stares. They were so confident, so utterly convinced of their power over him. They saw his silence as the prelude to surrender. Finally, he spoke. His voice, when it came, was not angry or defensive. It was unnervingly calm, clear as glass. "No." The word, a single syllable, landed in the center of the room like a grenade. The shock was instantaneous and profound. Marcus's jaw tightened. Eleanor's placid mask cracked. Serafina froze, her mouth slightly agape. They had never heard that word from him before. "What did you say?" Marcus demanded, his voice dangerously low. "I said no," Liam repeated, his gaze moving from Marcus to Eleanor and finally to his wife. "I will not be signing any papers. I will not be transferring any assets, and I will not be funding the bailout of a failed project." He then began to speak, his voice maintaining its steady, measured rhythm. He was no longer the quiet, agreeable man they thought they knew. He was an architect presenting his final findings. "For 5 years," he began, looking directly at Marcus, "I have sat at your dinner table and listened to you describe my life's work. The work that pays for this apartment, for your daughter's clothes, for the vacations you so generously invite me on, as a hobby, as drawing little pictures." He turned his head slightly to include Eleanor. "For 5 years, I have listened to you subtly inquire about my family's background, always with that delicate pity for my humble origins." His eyes finally settled on Serafina, and for the first time, she saw a stranger looking at her. "And you," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, more cutting. "For 5 years you have corrected my grammar at dinner parties. You have apologized to your friends for my simple taste in art or music. You have treated my professional opinions as quaint suggestions to be ignored. You have stood by, silent and smiling, every single time your father has belittled me, not once defending me as a partner, but only ever managing me as an embarrassing accessory." He paused, letting the catalog of grievances hang in the air, each one a perfectly placed charge. "You all speak of family as if it is a contract of obligation that only flows in one direction, towards you. You speak of responsibility, but you mean utility. You don't want a family member, you want a resource. And you have just discovered that this resource is no longer at your disposal." Serafina finally found her voice, a strangled, incredulous sound. "How dare you? After everything, you come here with your problems, your failures, and you dare to attack us?" Liam allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. "Ah, yes," he said, "my failures. Let's talk about those." The full, devastating scope of their miscalculation was about to be revealed. They thought they were presiding over the disciplining of a subordinate. They were about to discover they were squatting in a building he owned, just moments before the eviction notice was served. "You believe I am on the brink of financial ruin," Liam said, his voice retaining its dispassionate, analytical tone. "You believe my life's work amounts to a small, struggling firm and a modest investment portfolio. You are mistaken." He leaned forward, a subtle shift in posture that commanded the room's entire attention. "Your world, Marcus, is built on leverage, perception, and aggressive marketing. You build towers of glass and debt. My world is built on something else entirely: substance, discretion, and a scale you cannot possibly comprehend." He took out his phone. His movements were unhurried, each one imbued with a chilling sense of purpose. He tapped the screen a few times and then turned it to face them. On the screen, a live news conference was in progress. A banner at the feed read, "Solstice Arcology unveils Helios Project, Singapore." The camera panned across a breathtaking architectural model of a futuristic, sprawling city within a city, a marvel of green technology and innovative design. "My firm," Liam said, his voice cutting through their stunned silence, "is not Liam Croft Designs. That is a boutique subsidiary, a passion project I run myself. My actual firm, the one I co-founded with my partner 10 years ago, is a silent, controlling partner in Solstice Arcology. We are currently one of the 3 largest and most profitable architectural conglomerates in the world." He let that sink in. Marcus's face had gone pale, his bravado evaporating like mist. Eleanor looked utterly bewildered, as if Liam had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Liam's gaze found Serafina's. Her face was a canvas of warring emotions: utter disbelief, a dawning, horrified comprehension, and a desperate, flickering attempt to recalculate the new reality. The Helios project, Liam continued, gesturing to the phone, is our latest venture. It's a $30 billion sustainable urban development. It has been in quiet development for 6 years. It has already secured full funding from a consortium of sovereign wealth funds and private equity. It has already won the International Prize for Urban Innovation. The man you see at the podium right now, accepting the accolades from the Minister of Urban Development, is my partner, Javier Reyes. He switched off the phone and placed it on the table. The silence in the room was now absolute, a vacuum where their arrogance used to be. And as for the trouble I'm in, he said, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, the lawsuit from the Kensington Group, the structural miscalculations, the threat of financial ruin. He looked directly at Serafina, his eyes cold and clear as ice. It was a fiction, a lie, a test. It was a story I told you, Serafina, to see if there was any us left in our marriage. I created a crisis to see if you would stand with me, if you would be my partner. I needed to know if you would reach for my hand or simply calculate my new, diminished value to you. He let the final, brutal truth land. When I told you I was in trouble, you said it was my problem and went to brunch. When my fabricated failure threatened to inconvenience your father's bailout, you called me useless and a betrayal. You didn't just fail the test, Serafina, you set it on fire. As if on cue, the doorbell chimed. A moment later, the Thorns' bewildered housekeeper showed a man into the living room. He was sharp, energetic, dressed in an impeccable suit, and he was holding a striking, gold-plated object in his hand. It was Javier Reyes. He walked directly to Liam's side, ignoring the stunned Thorns completely. He placed the object on the coffee table. It was the Pritzker Architecture Prize Medal, the Nobel of their profession. The jet was fast, Javier said with a slight smile to Liam. I thought you might want this for the conversation. It adds a certain weight. He then turned his gaze, cold and dismissive, upon Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne, I presume? The room was no longer a courtroom. It had become an execution chamber, and the wrong person was in the chair. The silence that followed Javier's arrival was different. It was not the silence of suspense. It was the silence of a world ending. Marcus Thorne, a man whose entire identity was built on being the most powerful person in any room, looked small, deflated, a punctured balloon of a man. Eleanor stared at the Pritzker medal on the table as if it were a venomous snake. But it was Serafina whose reaction was the most profound. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument for social and financial calculation, was spinning, smoke pouring from the gears as it tried to process the new, impossible data. The quiet, simple man she had pitied, molded, and ultimately dismissed was not just successful. He was a titan. He was not in her league. She had never even been in his. Then the survival instinct kicked in, the instinct to pivot, to salvage, to reframe the narrative. Her face, which had been a mask of horrified shock, suddenly softened. She manufactured a dazzling, tremulous smile. Liam, darling, she breathed, taking a tentative step towards him. The endearment, once a tool of casual possession, now sounded like a desperate plea. Why didn't you tell me? It's incredible. We should be celebrating. She tried to reach for his arm, to reestablish the physical connection, the claim of ownership. Liam took a subtle step back, just out of her reach. The small movement was more damning than any shout. He looked at her, and his eyes were utterly devoid of the warmth she had so long taken for granted. Tell you, he repeated, the question flat and clinical. Why would I tell you, Serafina? So my success could become another one of your accessories? Another jewel on your bracelet? So you could announce it at your brunches and use it to climb another rung on a social ladder you already stood atop? He turned his gaze to her father. Or should I have told you so Marcus could see it not as an achievement, but as untapped capital? so he could leverage my life's work for his next reckless gamble, just as he tried to do today. The truth of his words struck them with physical force. Marcus flinched. Seraphina's smile faltered. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, tears welling in her eyes. It was another performance, but the desperation behind it was real. "No, that's not true. I love you, Liam. This, this doesn't change that." Liam let out a short, mirthless laugh. "You're wrong," he said, delivering the final quiet bomb that would shatter the last of her delusions. "It changes everything. Because it doesn't change that you love me. It proves you never did." He took a step closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear the full, devastating impact. "You were never in love with me. You were in love with the idea of me, the project of me. You were invested in my potential, but only the potential you could see and control. The moment you thought that potential was gone, the moment my value to you dropped to zero, you were gone. The moment my problem became your problem, you chose mimosas over your husband. You don't love me, Seraphina. You love what you think I can do for you. And the tragedy for you is that you fundamentally miscalculated my capabilities." He straightened up, his voice returning to its clear, public volume. He was no longer speaking to a wife, but to a soon-to-be former business associate. The love was a fiction. The partnership was a lie. The only thing that was real was the balance sheet. And you, my dear, have just been declared a catastrophic liability. Behind him, another figure stepped forward. A woman in a sharp, dark suit, carrying a sleek document case. She was Liam's personal attorney, a woman whose quiet demeanor belied a will of iron. She had entered with Javier, unnoticed in the initial shock. She opened the case and retrieved a sheaf of papers. With calm, deliberate movements, she stepped past the frozen forms of Marcus and Eleanor and handed the documents to Seraphina. "Mrs. Croft," the lawyer said, her voice polite but firm, "you are being served." Seraphina looked down at the papers in her hand. On top, in stark black letters, were the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The carefully constructed world of Seraphina Thorncroft had not just been shaken, it had been leveled. And from the rubble, Liam was walking away, his quiet dignity intact, leaving her to sift through the debris of a life she had valued so highly and understood so little. The immediate aftermath was chaos, but a strangely muted chaos. The Thorns were a family accustomed to shouting their way to victory, but their primary weapon, their status, had just been rendered useless. They were facing a power so immense it didn't even need to raise its voice. Marcus was the first to break, his ingrained instinct to negotiate with the biggest power in the room taking over. He ignored Liam, turning his attention to the man who represented a world he understood, the world of money and influence. "Mr. Reyes," he began, his voice raspy, attempting to muster some of his old boardroom bluster. "Javier, let's be reasonable. There has been a family misunderstanding. Liam is my son-in-law. There's no reason we can't be partners. A strategic alliance between Thorn Corporation and Solstice. It would be mutually beneficial. We have extensive holdings, market penetration." Javier Reyes, who had been observing the scene with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying insects, cut him off. His voice was not loud, but it was as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "let me be perfectly clear. My partner's judgment is my own, and for the past 5 years I have had a front-row seat to your family's treatment of him. Solstice arcology does not form alliances with entities that demonstrate such a profound lack of integrity." He took a step closer to Marcus, his eyes boring into the older man. "Furthermore, from a purely business perspective, we find your practices antiquated. You build for vanity. We build for the future. You leverage debt. We leverage innovation. We do not invest in failing projects, and we do not invest in failing ethics. There is nothing you have that we could possibly want." Every word was a nail in the coffin of Marcus's ego. He staggered back, speechless, looking for support from his wife, but Eleanor was staring blankly at the divorce papers in her daughter's hand, her own carefully preserved world crumbling around her. Serafina, meanwhile, was cycling through the stages of grief and desperation. The shock had given way to a frantic attempt at damage control. She crumpled the legal documents in her fist. "A lawyer? Divorce?" she choked out, looking at Liam. "You can't be serious. This is our life. You can't just throw it away over a misunderstanding." "It was not a misunderstanding," Liam replied, his voice still unnervingly calm. "It was a moment of absolute clarity. I saw exactly who you are, what you value, and it is not me." "I'll sign a postnup," she blurted out, the words desperate and transactional. "You can have it all. I don't care about the money. I just want you." Liam's lawyer, Ms. Albright, spoke up, her voice crisp. "That will not be necessary, Mrs. Croft. The prenuptial agreement your father's legal team insisted upon is quite sufficient." Serafina and Marcus both froze. The prenup. It had been Marcus's idea, a document designed to protect the Thorne family fortune from the simple architect his daughter was marrying. It strictly stipulated that in the event of a divorce, each party would leave with the assets they had brought into the marriage, plus a paltry, fixed settlement for the lower-earning spouse, which they had all assumed would be Liam. "The agreement is ironclad," Ms. Albright continued smoothly. "It protects Mr. Croft's premarital assets and all assets generated by his independent corporate entities during the marriage. As Solstice Arcology is an entity Mr. Croft co-founded years before meeting you, and all his earnings have been shielded within its corporate structure, your claim is limited to half the value of this apartment, which is mortgaged, and the settlement amount stipulated in Clause 12A. She paused for effect. $100,000. The sum, which would have once seemed insultingly small to them, now sounded like a death sentence. "As for your father's company," Liam said, addressing Marcus directly for the last time, "I will not be bailing it out. You were right about one thing, Marcus. This world runs on profit and loss. You made a bad bet. Now you get to absorb the loss." He paused, letting the memory of countless belittling dinners surface. "You built your empire on a foundation of arrogance. Let's see how it holds up under its own weight." With that, he turned to leave. Javier and Ms. Albright fell into step beside him. "Liam, wait!" Serafina cried, her voice finally breaking, stripped of all artifice, revealing the raw terror beneath. "Please, don't do this. Don't leave me." He stopped at the doorway but didn't turn around. "I'm not leaving you, Serafina," he said, his back still to her. "You left me a long time ago, at a brunch table I wasn't invited to." And then he was gone. The heavy door of the apartment closed behind him, the same solid, definitive thud as the day she had left him for her mimosas. But this time it was not sealing him in, it was sealing them out. Serafina sank to the floor, the crumpled divorce papers in her hand, surrounded by the beautiful, worthless trappings of a life that had just ceased to exist. The 6 months that followed were a slow, brutal education in the law of gravity. The Thorne Empire, deprived of its last-minute miracle and already structurally unsound, did not just fall, it imploded. The default on the Azure Point loan triggered a cascade of cross-collateralized debts. The banks, smelling blood and no longer intimidated by Marcus's bluster, called in everything. The first to go were the symbols. The fleet of European cars was repossessed. The private jet was seized on a tarmac in Geneva. The art collection, which Eleanor had curated as a testament to her taste, was auctioned off piece by painful piece, the sales reported with thinly veiled glee in the society pages. Finally, the mansion, the great monument to Thorne dominance, was sold at a fraction of its value to a tech billionaire who promptly announced plans to tear it down and build something more modern. Marcus Thorne, the shark, was beached. He was a man stripped of his power, a king without a kingdom. He spent his days in a rented apartment, staring at financial news channels, his face a permanent mask of disbelief and impotent rage. He had built his world on the principle that big fish eat little fish, never imagining he could be devoured by a whale he hadn't even seen. Eleanor, deprived of her social stage, withered. Her friends, the ones she had lunched and gossiped with for decades, stopped calling. In their world, financial ruin was a communicable disease. She was no longer a society queen. She was a cautionary tale. Her brittle elegance shattered, revealing the frightened, insecure woman it had always been designed to hide. But the most profound transformation was Serafina's. After the fall, she was forced to confront a reality she had never imagined: a life without a safety net. The prenup held. She received her $100,000, a sum that barely covered the legal fees from her failed attempts to contest it. For the first time in her life, she had to work. She found a job as an assistant at a contemporary art gallery in a trendy downtown district. The irony was thick and suffocating. She, who had once been a patron, who had dismissed artists with a wave of her hand, was now the one fetching coffee, answering phones, and explaining the meaning of a piece to a wealthy client who looked at her with the same faint pity she had once reserved for others. Her days were a study in humility. She took the subway. She packed her own lunch. She lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment she could barely afford. The beautiful clothes and jewelry were sold off, one by one, to pay for rent and groceries. She was stripped bare of all the things she had once considered her identity. One rainy afternoon, as she stood by the gallery window, she watched a young, wealthy-looking couple arguing on the sidewalk. The woman was berating the man, her voice sharp, her gestures dismissive. The man stood silently, his shoulders slumped, taking it. In that tableau, Serafina saw herself. She saw her own contemptuous dismissal of Liam, her casual cruelty, her absolute certainty in her own superiority. She saw the man on the sidewalk not as weak, but as patient, enduring. And for the first time, a wave of genuine, unadulterated remorse washed over her. It wasn't regret for what she had lost. It was sorrow for what she had been. That evening, she went home to her small, quiet apartment. She opened her laptop and composed a new email to Liam. Her previous attempts had been long, rambling pleas, full of excuses and blame. This one was different. It contained only 8 words. "You were right about everything. I am sorry." She hit send before she could lose her nerve. There were no excuses. There were no requests. It was a simple, unvarnished admission. Miles away, in a minimalist office overlooking the ocean, Liam received the email. He read the words on the screen. He saw the absence of justification, the starkness of the apology. He recognized it as the first truly honest thing she had ever said to him. He felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, not pity, but a quiet acknowledgement of a painful journey that had, perhaps, finally led to a sliver of self-awareness. He did not reply. The chapter was over. The story was written. He highlighted the email and with a single click moved it to the trash. He then turned back to the blueprints spread across his desk. They were for a new project, a passion project, a state-of-the-art public library and community center for a disadvantaged neighborhood, the very project his father-in-law had once mocked. The building was full of light and open spaces, designed not to intimidate, but to welcome. He picked up his pen and went back to work, his focus on building the future, not dwelling on the ruins of the past. A year later, the dedication ceremony for the Northwood District Public Library was held on a bright, crisp autumn day. The building was magnificent, a symphony of glass, warm wood, and recycled steel that seemed to rise organically from the small park it inhabited. It was a Liam Croft design, but it felt like a solstice arcology masterpiece. It was a gift to the city, funded entirely by a private philanthropic grant from Liam's foundation. Liam himself was not on the main stage with the mayor and other dignitaries. He stood near the back of the crowd, dressed in simple, comfortable clothes, watching the proceedings with a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had no need for the spotlight. The building itself was his statement. He watched as children from the neighborhood streamed into the new building for the first time, their faces full of wonder. He saw them run their hands over the smooth wooden tables, gaze up at the high, light-filled ceilings, and pull books from the shelves. This was value. This was the profit margin that mattered. His internal monologue, once a running commentary of frustration and analysis of the thorns, was now quiet, reflective. He thought about the nature of partnership, the true architecture of a relationship. Respect is a currency you earn with character, he mused, not one you can demand with status. A partnership is a structure built on two pillars of mutual support. If one pillar only ever takes, the entire structure is unsound. It is not a partnership. It is a cantilever, destined to collapse under its own imbalanced weight. He had faced humiliation and chosen dignity. He had been offered the chance for petty revenge and had chosen integrity instead. His justice had been poetic, not cruel. The thorns hadn't been destroyed by him. They had been destroyed by the sudden, stark revelation of the truth. They were the authors of their own demise. He had simply been the one to hold up the mirror. As the crowd began to disperse, he saw a woman across the courtyard. For a fleeting moment, her silhouette, the way she held her head, reminded him of Seraphina. He felt a brief, phantom echo of the past, but it vanished as quickly as it came. There was no anger, no pain, no regret. There was only a quiet sense of closure, the feeling of a scar that has long since healed, leaving only smooth, new skin behind. The woman turned, and it wasn't her. It was a stranger. Liam smiled faintly to himself and turned to leave, melting into the crowd. In the end, he hadn't just demolished a flawed marriage. He had cleared the site for a new life, a life built on a foundation that could never be shaken by the arrogance of others. He had lost a wife, but found himself. He had walked through the fire of their contempt and emerged not burned, but forged. And in the quiet, unassuming library filled with the laughter of children, he had built his true monument, not to his own ego, but to the enduring power of substance over show, of character over currency, and of a quiet strength that needs no applause to know its own worth. What we build in our lives is a testament to our values. Liam chose to build with integrity, light, and purpose. What are the most important things you are building in your own life? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember to like this story if it moved you, and subscribe for more content that explores the depths of the human heart. We'll see you next time.